listening to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to Two for Tuesday here at Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. The second show between this and recording the audio version of my book with my mother. We'll see if my voice and my sanity holds up. I doubt it will, but we'll try at least. We are going to talk Scott Peterson now for as long as we can all go. Laura Ingle, she's an original reporter on this story. I'm going to formally introduce her in a moment. She is going to stay with us as long as she can. She was in court today. But first, let me just give you a real quick background. It was 2 decades after Scott Peterson was sentenced to death for the murder of his pregnant wife in this very high-profile trial that the Los Angeles Innocence Project stepped in and said that they have now taken up his case. It marks a significant breakthrough for the 51-year-old convicted killer who has long maintained his innocence and has even claimed that he received an unfair trial. Today, he went before a judge via Zoom with the intent to clear his name. And as I said, Laura Ingle, she was in the courtroom, even though he wasn't. He was there via Zoom for Mule Creek State Prison. Laura is a crime reporter now for NewsNation based in New York City. Before that, she worked at the same place I did, Fox News, for 20 years. She began her career in radio working for the powerhouse KFI in Los Angeles. And she's back in front of the courthouse. I'm going to have her explain that in a moment. The man with the cool Aztec-looking carpeting and artwork there is Doug Maynor. He's with the law office of Doug Maynor, but you can't call him anymore. He's retired, but he is an original. He was a prosecutor, I should say, in Modesto at the time this case was going on. So he knows. He didn't work on the case per se, but he was there when this was all happening and knows some of the inner workings and has a bright legal mind and will weigh in on some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. And last, but certainly not least, the man with a dry sense of humor that I love, Court TV's Ted Rowlands. He worked for 20 years as a correspondent for CNN and ABC News. He's covered it all. O.J. Simpson, Michael Jackson, Jodi Arias, Scott Peterson, Robert Blake, Phil Spector. The list goes on. He's worked for a million different places. Seasoned, media savvy guy. Obvious first person we have to go here. Laura Ingle, you look chilly out there, but you're in a historic spot. Tell us exactly where you were, and then we'll get to the court proceedings.
Well, I'm coming to you from right outside of the very courthouse in Redwood City where the Scott Peterson double murder trial took place in 2004 and the sentencing hearing in 2005 when he was sentenced to death. And we are back here 20 years later at the very same courthouse today. We had a lot of familiar faces here. Ted, I didn't see you. You were missed. And a lot of people, kind of reminiscing and just, we can't believe we're back here because as many people who've been following the story for so long have said, the jury came to a conclusion. It's over. It's done. He's in prison. He's serving life without the possibility of parole. But here we are 20 years later. And we've talked about this on your show and Ted and I for a very long time, that there's been a lot of unanswered questions in this case. And that is what the Los Angeles Innocence Project has brought forth to this courthouse, asking a judge here to allow them to review evidence that they believe could point to another suspect in this case. Evidence there's a long list of things that they are asking for. They're asking for testing for DNA of a mattress that was found in the back of that burned out orange van that was found the morning after Laci Peterson vanished in 2002 on Christmas Day. It was a mile away from their home. There are a lot of questions about that van. We just had Mark Garagos on, Peterson's original attorney was on NewsNation on Elizabeth Vargas' show, and he has gone on TV a lot saying, this was something that wasn't turned over to us. We never knew about this. And the question is, of course, is why wasn't it? And what happened with the testing? I talked to Brian Spitulski, who's the fire investigator with the Modesto Fire Department, former fire investigator, and he told me, and he's in the LA Innocence Project documents, talking about how it was such a big deal once they realized that Lacey Peterson was missing, and how that van was looked at and it was tested. He tested it for presumptive blood. He came back with a positive result in the initial testing of that mattress. Then that mattress fabric went to the Department of Justice in Ripon, and they came up with a different conclusion. But there were some steps that didn't, take place after that, it appears, and that's what the LA Innocence Project wants their hands on, and they want that evidence to be retested. And then, of course, the witnesses who say that they saw Lacey with her dog after Scott Peterson went fishing on that Christmas Eve morning. So that was at the crux.
Yeah, there are people who say that they saw Lacey Peterson talking with people who purported to be burglars in that area. Bottom line is Laura Ingle is a tenacious reporter. She's out there covering the story once again as she did 20 years ago. Laura, you're going to be on Ashley tonight, Ashley Banfield on NewsNation. Where else can we see it?
I'll be on Ashley Banfield tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern. And then we expect to bring you more about that conversation I just told you about with Brian Spitulski. I spoke to him for almost 2 hours last night, and I'm going to bring you some of that conversation. And we're also going to show you some new video you've never seen before that he has provided of the neighborhood. It's a very unique look at where Scott and Lacey used to live. And we're going to show that to you tomorrow throughout the day on NewsNation. And you can also see that on my Instagram at Laura Ingle TV.
At Laura Ingle TV. NewsNation is important, but Instagram is as important. At Laura Ingle TV.
That's right.
But
and I can stick around. I can stick around for a little bit longer. I want to hear what your two guests have to say.
Okay, you got a little crackle, so I'm going to keep you on the mute. I will mute and unmute you, but we're all good. Ted Rowlands, did you ever think that we would see this? By the way, Lindsay Shea, I don't think that's a carpet. I guess the proper word is tapestry. But I do I go to UFC fights, rodeos, and other assorted weird things. So I'm not the most sophisticated guy in the world. And forgive me, Doug, that I called that a carpet and not a tapestry. But
it's
Ted Rowlands.
It's a Navajo rug.
Oh, there it is. So I wasn't far off. Navajo rug. Ted Rowlands. Did you ever think we would see this day where Scott Peterson reappears in a courtroom in Northern California to basically claim his innocence?
Well, I mean, we did see it a few years ago, and during the appeal process, and I was back there at the same courthouse. It's amazing, Laura, the place hasn't changed, has it? It's eerie. Like, when is the update coming? But yeah, now he has a little momentum with the LA Innocence Project representing him. It takes a huge burden off of Janie, because one of the things about him moving off of death row, the negative side of that is that no longer do the taxpayers of California fund your appeal and your habeas. So now the LA Innocence Project has come in and they're doing it. They've looked at it and they say, listen, we think there's something here that we want to pursue. So here we are. It is the case that never goes away.
That's certainly the case. Doug Maynor, you are retired now, but you were in Modesto when this was all happening. Just bring us back in time. How big a deal was this? And how in the world did you avoid getting involved on the case? Did you want to get involved?
Well, it was a huge deal. It totally overwhelmed law enforcement and the DA's office. They were not ready for the media onslaught. Sorry, guys, but it's true. It was just more than they could take and handle. And I think everyone was under extreme pressure to come up with a decision that right away, who did it and how we prove that it was this person. And with their binoculars, they focused on Scott and never looked anywhere else. And unfortunately, now we're seeing the consequence of overlooking other bits of evidence that may indicate that, yeah, maybe Mr. Peterson really didn't do it.
Doug, I'm going to come back to you on that. Laura's a little pressed for time, and she was obviously in court. So, Laura, just to kind of run through a couple of things with you, Scott Peterson, he appeared virtually before the San Mateo County judge. What did he look like to you? How did he look to you? I heard he was, smiling, seemed in good spirits.
Well, he was smiling because I think just that uncomfortable moment when things aren't going right, and there was a couple of technical difficulties, so they couldn't. The prison was trying to mute and unmute his feed, and so there was difficulties, and he'd kind of smirk at that. So I didn't really take much away from that. He was very polite. He, I didn't notice it at first, but somebody said, did you check out his man bun or his ponytail? I said, I hadn't noticed it, but he does have a different look. Like when you look at him straight on, his hair looks slicked back, but when you turn to the side, he has a ponytail. So that was something new we hadn't seen before. But overall, aside from the hairstyle, he looked basically the same. He looks thin but fit. His skin was clear. He was in a room with white walls, a green door behind him that had an opaque window. And you know what I really found interesting, you guys, is when the judge was talking about the next series of hearings that are going to happen, that the judge is going to allow in this case, the judge offered him, she said, do you want to be here or do you want to be on Zoom? And for each of them, he said he wanted to be on Zoom. And if you're in prison for life, and you have the opportunity for what I would imagine would feel like a field trip or just getting out of where you are. I just thought it was odd that he said that he would do a Zoom for the next 3 chances that he would have to be here in person. But that is what he chose to do.
Why do you think that is? That is really odd. I'd be dying to get out of there. You have any idea why?
I have no idea. We asked to talk to Janie when she left. She wouldn't speak to us. The LA Innocence Project wouldn't speak to us. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask. I don't know. I have no idea. I know that I've been over to Mule Creek State Prison. I know the route from Mule Creek State Prison to this location. It's a nice drive. Ted knows it well. I'm not really sure what the reasoning is for that. Maybe it's just easier for him to concentrate and focus on the task at hand if he's in one of those cells. I'm not really sure. But we did see Janie Peterson and Scott's brother, Joe, in the courtroom. No members of Lacey Peterson's family were here today. We had some of the original people who worked the court who are now retired who came today to be at the court proceedings. And of course, it was very interesting to see some of the original prosecutors in this case right back at that table, Harris and Burgett, talking about wanting to push back some of these dates for the hearings, saying that they needed more time, and the LA Innocence Project attorneys forcefully saying, you guys have had a lot of time, we need to get this underway, we want our investigation to begin as soon as possible. And so she set some hearings, like I said, for April, May, and July. So the case will continue, but we certainly didn't have, like Ted and I remember, this area that you see here behind me that was filled with members of the public and the press during the trial and for the verdict. We did have a pretty good turnout, but nothing like that. And I'll share it with you too, Joel. It's on my Instagram, but the picture, the famous picture of what we remember the verdict, that moment that the verdict was read and the crowd screamed and chanted, and we could hear it all the way in the very, very back of this courthouse. A picture, it's a very famous picture now, an award-winning picture, I think, and it's on the wall inside of the courthouse here still today in Redwood City.
Wow. As Ted says, I think it's time for a facelift there in Redwood City, but also, what was I just going to say? Man, this keeps happening. I think I'm the beginning stages of maybe dementia. I hope not, Ted Rollins. I hope that's not happening to me. But look at you, misdemeanor OG. Ted looks great, followed by Baby Doll. I remember Ted, I was glued to the TV due to me being on bed rest. Just because Scott Peterson has a man bun, Ted Rollins, doesn't mean that you still don't shine through with STS Nation. Do you agree, Ted Rollins, with Doug Maynor here, that perhaps investigators did have tunnel vision? That seems to be what Doug thinks, and he was in the prosecutor's office.
Well, yeah, but also if you talk to investigators, detectives, Bueller, Brocchini, the rest of them, they were focusing on Scott because they thought it was Scott day one, and now they still think it was Scott, and the things that he did and said and the way he comported himself, his story. There was a mountain of circumstantial evidence. I mean, yeah, we're here now 20 years later, but that jury heard the evidence and there was so much circumstantial evidence that they convicted him. I mean, if you sat through that trial, you would not you couldn't quibble with the jury's decision of guilty. On the other hand, if you sat through that trial, there are some things that are very disturbing in terms of how did he do it. You know, we've talked about it before. Rick D'Estasso got up in his closing and said, "We don't know," and it's one of those cases that there's this little sliver that he might not have done it, and now it seems like the LA Innocence Project has grabbed onto that, and it'll be interesting to see what actually is new here. And Laura, I'm interested today when that motion to seal. The judge wanted some more information, basically, because the state said, "Listen, we've got this redacted motion to seal. We don't even know the names of these people that Peterson's team is so concerned about their identity." So the attorneys got up for the LA Innocence Project and said, these people are very fearful of not only the public, but specifically the Modesto police for retribution. So we don't want to just give them the names. We want an in-camera hearing. We want this, and they asked the judge, can we go back to chambers? And then they said, there's more people like this that we have contacted, and we are interviewing, or I forget the actual word, but sounds like they have more than one person now. If you look back at their pleading that they put out after the strawberry shortcake hearing, they said someone came forward and said, I know, did it. This individual blank was talking about it at a party. They tracked down someone who was at that party. So maybe there's more there now. And I was very interested to hear them say now there are more people as well that want to have their identities basically concealed, even possibly to the prosecution on some level, or at least not have it be a public filing.
Right, and they mentioned, and that obviously that was one of the 3 hearings that was set. And I heard retribution from the Modesto Police Department, the Modesto PD. They were worried about, you're right, retribution or retaliation. But everybody has been wanting to know what that was, and it didn't sound like they got that in-camera hearing because we saw them leave. So what is new? That's what many of us want to know. Initially, when I heard about the sealing of documents, I was curious because there's a lot of personal information in the LA Innocence Project's big memorandum that they have filed. There's bank information, there's phone numbers and addresses. And at first I thought maybe that's what it was about. But you're right, Ted. It sounds like they have some other people. And look, that's for 20 years, we've been talking about this one section of the case. The reason a lot of people didn't come forward initially is because they were afraid. It was a story that was a big deal. Am I going to be in the news? Is my name going to be out there? Are there going to be cameras out in front of my house? Are people going to look at me if I tell them something that might help Scott Peterson? There were a lot of people who didn't come forward with small tips, big tips, you name it. Those stories have been out there for a long time. So hopefully in these next few months, we're going to find out exactly, at least, if not their names, what they might bring to the table.
And Laura, have we learned anything more? Jody Arrington is asking who funds the LA Innocence Project, obviously an offshoot of the National Innocence Project, but we know who's behind this. It's very mysterious still, right?
I don't think it's mysterious. And the LA Innocence Project is completely separate from the National Innocence Project. They have come out and made that distinction because, boy, when this happened back in January, and Ted, you can back me up on this, when this happened, everybody's like, what? The LA or the Innocence Project is backing Scott Peterson. And they came out and said, and I think the National came out as well and said, no, we're 2 totally separate things. So they are not a part of each other. And the LA Innocence Project goes through a college in Southern California. And I don't want to state the wrong places of funding on that, but it is gone through a college down in Southern California and not part of the National Innocence Project.
Doug Maynard, there's so many comments in the chat from "this is making me angry" to he's a sociopath, he's a psychopath. Obviously speaking about Scott Peterson. Right here. Here's another one. I just came across it. This is infuriating. He told Amber Fry he wasn't married. He dyed his hair. He went to Mexico, asked cops about cadaver dogs. A few moments ago, you just sort of suggested that maybe there was tunnel vision, but as Ted said, there was a ton of circumstantial evidence as well. How do you square this?
Well, I think the lens that we need to look at is, did he get a fair trial? Was all the evidence that was necessary to provide a competent legal defense provided to his attorneys? And we're hearing about this orange van. We've heard about a burglary that happened across the street, and there is limited information regarding what's known as exculpatory evidence, or evidence that shows that maybe someone else did the crime. It wasn't given to his attorneys. Garagos told via Laura, he told you just a moment ago, that he didn't hear about this burned up orange van. Well, that's really significant. If the firemen thought that was significant, why didn't the cops think it was significant? Because they had blinders on? It's hard to say. I don't think they willfully wanted to defraud the public or anyone else by convicting someone they knew to be innocent. But on the other hand, they have a job to give all the evidence, both the evidence that supports their theory and the evidence that doesn't support their theory, to the defense and the prosecution. So all the facts are before the jury, not just the cop's version of the facts.
And
Well
if I may, Joel, I think one of the things that we may hear further on down the road is that evidence from the orange van, I believe, was tested, and maybe it was inconclusive, and maybe there wasn't enough DNA sequencing to find out who that presumptive blood belonged to.
But the defense, they can test, sorry to interrupt, they can test that too. Just because it was inconclusive doesn't mean the defense doesn't get to be told about it or given their
good
own
point.
test.
Yeah.
And for the record, they did that orange van was in the discovery, the original discovery. It was a black and white photo, and it was sort of lost. But I do remember, Laura, you probably remember Matt Dalton, who used to be part of Garagos' team.
Right.
He was fixated on the orange van as well, along with the white van. So it was out there. Now, Mark didn't use it at trial, and he's now saying that it wasn't. It was in the discovery. It was, I guess, buried, if you want to put it that way, but it was there.
Well, Ted, so I mean, is that the reason Garagos never used it? I mean, was that a total oversight on his part that it was buried in this discovery?
I don't know why it wasn't further investigated by both Modesto police and the defense. I mean, that you have this fire inspector saying that he thinks there was blood there, and he believes that the van was torched to hide a crime. Well, whose blood was it? What crime was it? And why wasn't it investigated, even if it had nothing to do with Lacey Peterson? And I guess part of that equation, I'm sure, is at that point, everybody was stressed out, and it may have just got lost in the shuffle.
Laura Ingle, someone said he doesn't want to be in the courtroom because then people could read his body language. That's an interesting take as to maybe why. I mean, that sounds like it's going deeper than maybe he would give, that maybe he would think about. Now, you mentioned there are 3 motions pending. One, of course, for this post-conviction DNA testing. What are these 3 motions all about? And I might add, by the way, that a guy named Maurice Hastings, he had his conviction overturned by the LA Innocence Project just earlier this month. So they've had some success. It sounds like, from what I can tell from just a quick look at the chat, people would be just besides themselves if this conviction was overturned. But just, Laura, if you can elaborate on these 3 different motions that you kind of talked about at the top a little bit.
Right. And we just touched on it about that. One is about sealing information, and that's one part. And then the DNA testing of evidence is another part. And there was a hammer that was found inside the Medina's home, the people that lived right across the street from Scott and Lacey, who had their home tossed about, and they were burglarized. And there was a hammer that had a glove around it that investigators apparently, according to these documents, never tested. Could have had, we know the 2 guys that were, arrested and admitted to doing it, but there are apparently others who might have been involved. And there was this alleged criminal network going on around the Modesto neighborhood at the time of this crime. So they want that tested. So that's one thing. So DNA testing, sealing that motion that has the names in it, and then the other part, all the rest of the discovery that they're looking for. and specifically some of the audio recordings of the witnesses that say they saw Laci. They say that evidence that there were a lot of people that never got callbacks. My name is in this court document, to my surprise, and that comes from they want to have the interview that Homer Maldonado, one of the people that lived in Modesto, says that he called the Modesto Police Department to report that he had seen Laci Peterson walking her dog and that he never got a call back, that he went to the command center. He said repeatedly that he saw her. But one thing that I want to mention about these, when you hear that these witnesses weren't called back, many of them, remember, Scott Peterson said that when Laci was last seen before he drove away to his fishing trip, was wearing black pants and a white top. So a lot of people called in and said, I saw a lady wearing black pants and a white top. Laci Peterson washed ashore wearing khaki pants. However, I want to make the distinction that when these people didn't get those callbacks, she hadn't been found yet. So still a problem, right? And that's still a big point that the LA Innocence Project is looking at, and the family has always looked at to say, these people it just wasn't followed up on, and why not? And we want to see those phone calls that came in. We want to hear what those people said. So that is part of that other part of the evidence.
And for those who are just joining, both Ted Rollins and Laura Ingle literally covered this case. Ted literally from day one, I believe, or I believe it was Ted literally from day one. And Laura was there as well as a KFI radio reporter. And Doug Maynor was in the prosecutor's office. Olienka says the van photo that was included in discovery was black and white, as Ted just mentioned. And so the blood or bloodstains were easy to miss. Doug, do you agree with that? What do you think happened here? If it, I didn't realize it was in the original discovery and pile of evidence. What do you think happened? Why wouldn't someone like Mark Garagos have just jumped on this?
Well, if all he saw was a picture of a van, then he had no clue that there might be blood inside. So I'd be interested to hear if the report from the Department of Justice Crime Lab said they saw presumptive blood. And if that was not discovered to the defense, then that would be a huge problem. The DA, if all the cops did was look at the van, take the picture, and then move on in their march to convict Mr. Peterson, then that's what they did. But they have a duty to investigate all reasonable parts of the case. And as you guys mentioned a minute ago, the fact we've got a burned up van around the block at the same time, virtually, of this crime, it merits investigation. It should be looked into, and the results should be given to the defense. So either the cops didn't investigate it fully, or they did and they buried it. Either way, it's not good for the prosecution in defending the Innocent Project's motion.
Yeah, and it sounds like Doug is just interested in Scott Peterson having had a very fair trial, which it sounds like that may not have been the case, but we're finding this information out. It's all developing right now. Back to Laura Ingle, who's in front of the courthouse in Redwood City where this all played out. Do we know if Scott, by the way, Laura, they had this was originally from Stanislaus County, but they had to move. There was a change of venue. Mm-hmm. And so it was moved to Redwood City. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. The pretrial publicity, the trial, being considered being in Scott and Laci Peterson's hometown, where there were a lot of people who knew them, loved them, worked with them. And it was just, we were all, Ted and I were there, and everybody who watched knows that it was just an absolute mob scene there. And it ended up being here too. But they decided to have the change of venue for the pretrial publicity to look for, to get a fair jury pool is that they were going for. And then we had, there were a lot of people here that, gosh, I saw somebody today, Ted, with marching around with a sign. It was for a different case, but it brought me back to the days when we saw people here, dressed up in costume. I mean, it was a crazy scene back then, and it continued to be here. But yes, change of venue, Redwood City, and this is where the court case sits still today and will be handled. Until the next time, if there's a next time.
Yeah. They say history repeats itself. So now new signs for new cases at the same old courthouse. Courtney H. here. Laura, back to you on this one. Do we know if Scott reached out to the LA Innocence Project, or did they reach out to him? Do we know how this all even came about?
I believe he reached out to them. And this happened in July of 2023, I believe. Ted. I'm looking for your, but yeah, Scott reached out to them is what I read.
And Ted, back to you on this one from LFT Decipher. And Laura just talked about it. Does anyone think it's odd? Do you think it's odd, Ted, that the description of what Lacey was wearing doesn't match what she was found in? What does that tell us?
Well, yeah, it's odd, and both sides use it to their advantage. The defense tries to use it as Scott last saw her wearing this, and the prosecution says, well, Scott's a liar, and this is another reason why he is a liar. And so at trial, I think it came off as being an advantage to the state that she was found in clothes that more matched what she wore the night before, when they went to get pizza with Lacey's sister. That was the connection that the state was able to use, because the clothing that she was found in, and there wasn't basically nothing left except for a waistband and a little bit of fabric, that it matched more what she was seen in the night before. So boom, Scott killed her, and he lied about her going walking.
Julia says, "Oh, Joel, he's guilty as F." It rhymes with duck. And then Ned Smith, friend of the show, says Scott dyed his hair blonde before the man bun, and he was set to flee. So all these things. Doug Maynard, back to you. The LA Innocence Project basically just says, look, these deficiencies in the evidence provided to the defense at the time of trial is enough for him to at least be retried. Do you agree with that, Doug Maynard?
I do. I don't think he got a fair trial to begin with, and he deserves another trial. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the court.
Hang on one sec, Doug. Hang on one sec. Laura Ingle, we're going to miss you. Thank you for being with us for this short time.
Thank
Laura
you.
Ingle TV is her Instagram. She's going to be posting this at Laura Ingle TV, and watch her on Ashley Banfield tonight. Laura, you're the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Great to talk with you all. I'll see you later.
Okay.
Bye, Laura.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you on Ashley tonight.
Yeah. I don't miss Ted. Do you miss freezing to death doing live shots when I used to have to stand in Iowa, in Des Moines in February for the caucuses? Do you miss that, Ted?
No. Well, I anchor, I host a show on Court TV every day, and so sometimes we take the show on the road. And boy, it's a reminder of the old days, that's for sure. I was covering Chad Daybell's case out in Boise and did not prepare in terms of long underwear. So yeah, but no, looking at Lori,
Ted, what about this? Is it true that the van was found in the vicinity of a relative of one of these alleged burglars?
The burned out van was found near the airport, which is only about a mile away. And it's all very close. Modesto's not a massive metropolis, obviously. And so the van was in the airport district, and that's where it was found. It was abandoned on Christmas morning on fire. So was it near one of the burglars' homes? It may have been in that general area, but in terms of the orange van, that van was found burned out near the.
Doug Maynard, to you. Now it's just the three of us here. We'll probably just go for. It's not going to be one of these protracted, long STS shows, but I did want to get Laura. She was set to be on the whole time, but obviously has a lot of obligations. And Doug literally stepped in last second. He thinks that Steve Cohen and I are kind of insane, which we are, because we bombarded him and said, "Hey, do this for us," and he did, because he's a mensch with a Navajo rug behind him. Lorna McKenzie. He was already refused a new trial. That was a few years, maybe 4 years ago. I forget. Ted would know exactly. What about that? He tried to appeal it, tried to get a new trial. Didn't work. Is he just going up and down escalator at this point, or do you think there's enough there for him to be going through this process right now with the LA Innocence Project?
Well, the Innocence Project folks certainly think so, and their time is valuable. They're very selective in the cases that they have, and look at the new evidence that they've generated that wasn't known to anybody at the last time around when he took a shot as a new trial. Plus, it's a different legal venue, so he's entirely within his rights to go forward with this. And it sounds like there's some merit to their arguments. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out in the months to come.
I love Doug Maynard's style. I think he's going to get some flack from STS Nation, but he is speaking as a defense attorney, and everybody deserves a vigorous defense. And so he's going back to not his prosecutorial roots, but his defense roots here. Ted, to you, Peterson's been waiting, they said today in court. This was now the LA Innocence Project on behalf of Scott Peterson, that he's been waiting 20 years to get some of the audio recordings and police reports. Do we know kind of more specifically what they are speaking of here?
They're claiming that the discovery was not turned over throughout this in full, and that he has asked for additional discovery since he's been incarcerated now 20 years. Sorry, he wasn't on this mission for the entire 20 years. The first 5 or so, he was just dealing with day to day and going through his trial, etc. But for an extended period of time, and I think it's more Janie, his sister-in-law, who is now an attorney. She's committed a great portion of her life to trying to free Scott. She believes in her heart of hearts that he didn't do it. So that's what they're difficulty getting certain items post-conviction mainly that they have been after for. And this is where the LA Innocence Project is a huge win for them, because now you have this organization that's dedicating its time with these accomplished attorneys. They're all in and they're pushing. We saw it today in this hearing. They pushed back when Dave Harris tried to say, we need 90 days. And we don't want that 90 days to start until the first 90 days for the first ask on the DNA is there. And the judge said, no, we have a stay from the Court of Appeals here, and the LA Innocence folks pushed back as well. And that's when that quote came up. He's been waiting 20 years.
This is an interesting comment, Doug, from Beautifully Brilliant. This is wishful thinking here, but there's a bigger point. I believe America needs to go the way of the United Kingdom and to some extent Canada, and not put in the press, shame on Ted, case details until the trial is over. It's the only way for a fair trial. But do you think, Doug, now with the advent of social media, I ask this question pretty frequently, that there's more of a, and I'm not saying this, don't come yelling at me, don't send me hate. I'm not saying this about Scott. I'm saying it much more broadly. But do you think now, modern day, that there's more of a presumption of guilt than there is innocence a lot of times, just because of the power of, let's say, social media, the power of the press, the fact that people are pretty much incriminated a lot of times by the media before the trial runs its course or the judicial system runs its course?
I agree with you. I think that's certainly the case, but I wouldn't say it's just started now. As a prosecutor, I tried over 100 jury trials, and I would be talking to the jurors during jury selection, and the judge would say, do you understand that the defendant here is innocent until proven guilty? Do you have any presumptions in that regard? And I can't tell you how many jurors have said, well, he got arrested, didn't he? The case is this far, he must be guilty. So I think there's a presumption that a lot of people have that the folks who end up in the courtroom on trial are guilty to begin with. And then this 24/7 news cycle and social media and all the hubbub that's been going on, well, starting 20 years ago and more intense now, just fuels those flames.
Yeah. Ted, how do you think the news cycle has changed from when you first got into the business? You'd have stories that were in the news for a week or 2 weeks or a month, but I mean, how do you view it?
Now it's a click. Unless it has staying power, and it's very rare you get one with it. It's in and out. But I do believe that the media coverage usually works against defendants.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's no doubt about that. Slackjaw here, who has a similar wry sense of humor like Ted Rowlands. What makes Scott Peterson so special? I'm sure there are many more compelling cases. Ted, I mean, playing like devil's advocate here, do you think that the LA Innocence Project said, hey, let's raise our profile. Let's get a guy that everybody knows about, and let's try to work his case as opposed to Joe Schmo? But in fairness, I just mentioned a guy that they got a conviction Maurice Hastings, who I know nothing about, but his conviction was just overturned. But do you think they went after Scott because of the high profile nature and the fact that we are doing a podcast and talking about this, and Ashley Banfield's talking about it, and I think you guys are on Court TV as well?
Oh, absolutely. We covered we played the entire hearing today on Court TV. The bottom line is that that criticism is valid, because if Scott has had resources. He was on death row, so he had Cliff Gardner represented him out of Berkeley's fantastic appellate attorney. He had his family pay for Mark Garagos to represent him at trial. And so the criticism that really you're going to go back and give this guy your time, attention, and resources when there are undoubtedly other people out there that could use this help that don't have the resources. That's a valid criticism. And I the cynical journalist that I am, and we all are, is, of course, they are fledgling. They just started. I mean, the LA Innocence Project launched less than 2 years ago. This gets them out there, and it does. And now their name is out there like it hasn't been before. So absolutely, I think that's a factor here. Hey, if they can spring Scott Peterson, imagine what kind of attention they'll get. Now, if Scott Peterson is innocent, good on him. But I get the criticism.
From Ned Smith, Doug Maynor, you're a retired defense attorney. Innocent men, this has come up a lot, which is why I just brought the comment in. Innocent men don't dye their hair and flee, or at least try to flee. What's your response to that?
There's a couple different ways to look at that. Let's go back to the intense media and police pressure on Scott at the time he was free, before he got arrested. He didn't know it, but they're tapping his phone. But the media was camped out outside of his house every day. Every move he made, they were all over him. The guy panicked. He was under incredible pressure, and maybe he acted a little bit strange by dyeing his hair and wanting to get out of Dodge, right? He was getting in his car. He was going to San Diego to be with his family. And why stay in Modesto at that point when everyone is focusing on you as a killer? So yeah, he dyed his hair and left. He was tired of the media attention. That doesn't mean he was running away trying to escape justice.
There you go. There's a defense attorney's answer. Maybe it's the case. We just don't know. Jackie Rocha, who is Lacey's mother. Ted, I know that you've spoken with her. I don't know the last time you've talked to anyone in the family, but what do you think? And I think I asked you this last time. This has got to be like pouring salt in a proverbial cut, right, for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's Sharon Rocha. Jackie Peterson was.
Sorry.
Scott's mother who
Sharon
passed
Rocha,
away. But it's Sharon. Yeah. This won't end. And if you go back to when the state Supreme Court ruled Scott was not to be on death row because of a decision that Judge DeLuca made during voir dire during the original trial, Sharon Rocha had an opportunity, along with Brett, to address Scott when he was resentenced to life without parole. And that was just a few years ago, 2021, I believe. And she said, she laid out the case a little bit in front of him and said, you got on the computer December 8th. You looked up a pier in the Berkeley Marina to launch a boat that you bought on December 9th. You planned her death. I had dinner with you and Ron and Lacey, and we were talking about Connor, and the whole time you were thinking about your life without him and killing your own son and my daughter. And it was very poignant. And one thing that I took away from it was that, which is obvious, this is a wound that, of course, will never heal, but this case won't even let it scab over. I mean, this is coming up all the time. And now here we are 20 years later. Right where we are right now with the LA Innocence Project, it's the beginning of this next chapter, which could last many, many months, but likely years. And the family, the Roaches, have to deal with it.
That's a great point. This could be the beginning, the next beginning of this part of this case, as Ted says, that never ends, and the families are always dragged into it. Someone actually reminded me, I didn't realize this, but Katie Kool-Lady, who's a friend of the show, she attended the trial, and I'd like to get her on. her own sister was murdered. So, and she's dealt with the appeals process for years and years. So we'll try to get Katie Kool-Lady in on this as well. There's a quote, Paula Canny, Doug, is the attorney now representing Scott Peterson, and she spoke outside the courtroom today for a brief period of time. She says to the media today, what if Scott Peterson, is not guilty? Okay. What if he had an affair and was just a crappy husband? But what if he didn't kill her? What if that van shows it's Laci's DNA? Two things happen. 20 years of his life or 23 years of his life is gone. His family has bankrupted itself trying to exonerate him, and Laci and Connor's killers have walked free for 20 years. So think about that. What do you make of that comment?
A couple different things. One, from Scott's point of view, if he's truly innocent, that's the most horrible nightmare that could happen to anybody. His wife was killed. His baby was killed. He's falsely accused. He's facing death. And here he is 20 years later. He's still fighting for his life. So that needs to be resolved. He needs to have a fair hearing, a fair trial. The second is the public, all of us, we need to know too. And I think the DA's office and law enforcement has a duty, not only to Scott, but to everybody, to give up all the evidence, and let's have a fair hearing. And if that means a second trial, so be it. That's what our system requires.
Bobo says, sadly, I'm sick of making excuses for predators, all claiming to be victims. Look, I get the hate. I get the animus here. People are very upset about this, that he's even getting a shot. But I guess that's what makes America America. I mean, to me, the circumstantial evidence all points to his guilt, all the things that he did. But look, the flip side, there is that, as Ted said, a sliver of possibility that, that he was fearful, that he panicked. Doug just said, there was tremendous media pressure. Who knows? But that's why this process is playing out right now. But Doug, back to you. Do me a favor. Just I'm curious. So, what was a day in the prosecutor's office like while this was going on? I mean, was there like a palpable buzz? Like every time you'd go in, would you see, like in the newsroom, there's always people yelling from one side to the next, and you can feel the energy. Was it like that in there at the time of this case?
Well, there's a lot of craziness out on the streets with the media vans and everything else, but we basically just went and we did our job. We didn't interact with the Peterson prosecution team. They're all siloed up. They didn't talk to anybody else, and they're very paranoid about leaks. So they didn't even share information about the case with the people in the office. They kept that very quiet amongst themselves. I only knew about the facts by reading it in the paper and listening to folks like Ted and Laura on TV. So there was a lot of pressure, and the police, I think, were feeling it. They had to solve that case, and they thought they did. I can't hear you.
That was my fault, muting myself. Adam Lamparello is an attorney, I believe. The Innocence Project does not take cases unless they have serious merit. This could reveal a travesty of justice, but it is going to take quite a bit of time, as we were just discussing with Ted, to figure that out. Ted, some of the other circumstantial evidence that is sort of eye-popping is he admitted to police he was fishing on the day his wife disappeared. But during the trial, he couldn't explain what type of fish he was trying to catch that day. Then he sells Laci's car. He researched selling their house. I think that was before, obviously, the crime. Turned the baby nursery into a storage room. Didn't really help with the search. There's so many things that just either point to him being a complete callous narcissist who just only thought of himself, or a guilty guy.
Yeah, and he was found guilty because of all of that. You can add to that list, he upgraded his soft porn channel to hardcore porn as well. And the state used every bit of it during the trial. And it was part of this mountain of circumstantial evidence. At the end of the day, I always tell people, if you look at just the surface information and what we've heard about the Scott Peterson case, and you kind of watched it, oh yeah, the dude is guilty as sin, 100%. Throw him underneath the courthouse steps. But if you sit there and you analyze everything and you get too deep into the weeds, which both sides, of course, did, then you do have some questions. And again, Rick DeStasso said it in his close. I don't know. We don't know how he did it. Where was the blood? Where was how was he on the computer at his workshop while, under the state's theory, Laci's body is wrapped in a tarp in a 14-foot boat? How does he move the body from the house to the pickup truck, then from the pickup truck to the boat? Or when did he do that? Did he do it at the workshop? And they can't fit inside. Is it the whole thing is it's not a open and shut case if you look at all the details. It is if you look at his behavior, and he's despicable. Him on the phone with Amber during the search for Laci, or the vigil, all of these little things, including the hair, the $30,000, $15,000 in the car. I forget how much, when he was arrested. It's just a lot. And the jury heard this case and said that, hey, we think this guy's guilty, even though don't know how he did it.
Ted, why do you think we know so little about the LA Innocence Project, especially because this story is pretty big?
Because they just launched, a couple of years ago, and it's a separate entity. And the Innocence Project, of course, has been around since Barry Scheck, started that post OJ for many years, and their work has been fantastic. This one, this is just a different entity. It has nothing to do with the Innocence Project as we know it. Their name sure sounds familiar, and I think they have a lot on the line here with this decision to jump in and represent Scott Peterson. As one of the comments said, this could be imagine if he didn't do it. Imagine if Scott Peterson didn't do it. Well, that would be, I can't think of a case where it had so much attention and there was so much circumstantial evidence against somebody, and then 20 years later you find out, oh my gosh, we were wrong. And if Laci's blood is in that van, and that if they were able to determine it's her DNA in that mattress in that van, well, it's game over. He didn't do it. But the odds of that still pretty low.
Well, I already saw Doug Main. I already saw a comment. Well, maybe Scott's family planted Laci's DNA in that van. But do you agree with Ted? If they find Laci's DNA on that bloody mattress, that it is, as Ted just said, game over, and Scott walks free?
Well, I think he gets a new trial for sure. And I think at that point, the DA goes into settlement mode, and they never have a trial. They're going to offer him a time served outcome and not have a trial. They'll be afraid to try this case again. And the two prosecutors, Flanagan and Harris, they've retired. So who's going to try it?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what are they doing? Have they gone fishing? What are they doing?
They're living their lives. They're retired. And so for them to say that they don't have enough time to respond to the Project Innocence demands is ludicrous, because they're not doing anything else.
Doug Maynard, what do you do with retired life, in your retired life? Do you go to like Africa and go to the Serengeti? What do you do? What do you do for fun?
My wife still works, so I don't get to travel like I might like, but I volunteer for some environmental organizations, Friends of the River and the Sierra Club. I'm on the board of directors of both of those, and I take some of my legal knowledge and try to apply it to them and help out in that regard. I do some other volunteering work as well, and I relax. I enjoy my free time.
Look, Ted Rollins would get fired for asking that question at Court TV, but I can ask that question on my podcast, so I did. Susanna Madingo, that's why she's responding to Adam Lamparello, who is in fact an attorney, who said that there might be evidence. She says that's why this is shocking. Every case has tips. One unresearched tip does not equal an unfair trial, but blood on a mattress in a van, I don't know. That could be a pretty big deal. Ted Rollins, for those who don't know the case well, what is all this controversy? First of all, who is Strawberry Shortcake, and what is all this controversy about her?
She was juror number 7. Rochelle Neese is her name, and the state Supreme Court, as part of Scott Peterson's appeal, they looked at it and said, yes, we think that there was possibly some issues with this juror because she lied on her questionnaire about being the victim of domestic abuse. And so they sent it down to San Mateo. They appointed a judge to hold a week-long hearing, and they brought this juror in. And at the end of the day, this was Peterson's best chance at getting a new trial in terms of his immediate appeal, not the habeas, which you could bring in other new evidence. This was just about what happened at trial, and does he deserve a new trial because this juror may have lied on her questionnaire? And at the end of the day, the judge decided no, and so he was not given a new trial. But what happened during that, which is interesting, is that it got some substantial media play, not nationally, but specifically regionally. And somebody reached out to Janie Peterson during this period of time and said, hey, I know who did it. This guy was talking about it at a party, and the Petersons sent an investigator out, found this person, found a couple people who apparently heard somebody talking about the abduction of Lacey Peterson. And that was brought up today. And this is I'm assuming I'm connecting a dot, but it's not a stretch, that this is what they were talking about, the LA Innocence Project, of these new people that have come forward. And they want to keep their identities sealed, and that they want this court not to release who they are at this stage of the game because they're fearful.
Mo Freedom says OJ is still looking for the real killer to this day. Even wrote a book about it. And then followed up by Alice Ryder Feld. Circumstantial evidence is evidence. Mark Garagos, people asked, what does he think about this? Well, he was quoted a couple months back. He was asked if he thinks that Scott Peterson has a decent chance of getting out of prison. And his answer, Doug, was, I do. I've always felt this way. You're talking to somebody who has been pilloried for the last 20 years for having the temerity to say that I think he's innocent, meaning that Garagos was saying he's innocent. He's been pilloried. That's his job as a criminal defense attorney, but it does sound, and we've had Garagos on this show, it does sound like it's more than just a defense attorney speaking. It sounds like he actually believes this to be true. What do you think?
The only people who really know what happened aren't involved in the process. It's only going to be Lacey and maybe Scott, maybe not. No one really knows who's innocent and who's guilty. So it's hard to say if Garagos is accurate or not when he believes that Scott's innocent. But if you just look at the facts and look at the evidence, which we're supposed to do in court, and that's what the lawyers and jurors and judges do, there's a lot of facts that add up to reasonable doubt, most of which weren't presented to the jury. So shouldn't Scott get his chance to get those reasonable doubt type of facts before a neutral jury and let them make a decision?
Let's talk hypotheticals for a moment, and then we're going to start to wrap up. This is show number 2 for Tuesday. Mary Binney, friend of the show. Joel, what about, and this is Ted, what about Amber Fry? Will she act as a witness again? Let's just say that for whatever reason, this would go to trial. I mean, it would be problematic, right, Ted? Because as Doug just said, the prosecutors are gone, they're retired. But what about, like an Amber Fry? Would she come back and potentially ever take a witness stand again? Could they even, they could call her for sure, but what about the prosecution? What about all these different what ifs 20 something years later?
Well, Amber Fry can answer because Gloria Allred has already articulated that Amber would absolutely do it again if need be. And so I think that is one thing that you could expect. But I do agree with Doug that the odds of this going to trial again are slim to none. If he gets a new trial, he's getting likely freedom, time served, because as Janie Peterson has said multiple times, if Scott Peterson gets a new trial, no jury will ever convict him again. And I tend to believe that because the only way he gets a new trial at this point is new compelling evidence that this judge deems is worthy of a new trial. So if he gets over a hump, now we're talking about 20 years later, who's not available, who's passed away. it makes everyone's job much harder, especially the states, in my opinion.
Dwayne Harris with a super sticker from Detroit. Big friend of the show. Thank you for that, Dwayne. Always very generous. Here's a question from hey, it's Jay. To you, Doug. Ted answered this, but what are his odds of being granted a retrial? He's already been denied before. Don't they have to show fresh evidence? Your response to that, and then I want to ask you about this van one more time.
Well, yeah, they have to show evidence at a habeas corpus proceeding, if I understand it correctly. And I want to remind everybody that I was put on the show with no warning. I may be a little incorrect, but the point of the habeas is here's evidence that was overlooked at the first trial that could make a difference in the trial. It's fair to the defendant to have a new trial for that reason. So that's the legal issue the judges and the lawyers are focusing on right now, as I understand it. So let's let them get that evidence and let's see where it goes.
And Doug, back to you on this. So I'm very intrigued, as I think everyone is, with this orange van. And I didn't know until Ted just told us, or I forgot it from the last time, that it was in the original pile of discovery and evidence. But if you were defending Scott Peterson, what would you do with this mattress in this?
Well, I'd first make sure I got all the reports that were behind the van. And it's unclear if the fire department reports and the DOJ reports were discovered to the defense or not. So I'd contact the DA, I get all that. Then I'd do my own investigation with my own neutral investigators, perhaps testing the blood, and make up my own mind on it and not take the opinion of law enforcement. Because that's the most important piece of new evidence, and it really needs to be looked into. And like we all agree, it's a game changer.
Ted Rowlands, the final question, then we'll start to wrap up, but it's not really a question. It's more presenting this. Laura talked about Brian Spitulski. He is the, I think now retired Modesto fire investigator who worked this case, and she sat and talked with him for 2 hours, and that is going to be on NewsNation. But he was speaking about this burned out vehicle. His quote is, "It made it like this was much more important than just a burned vehicle that someone was just wanting to get rid of or cover up a simple crime." He goes on to say, "I don't have an agenda or an opinion on Scott Peterson's guilt or his innocence. This is, for me, a fire investigation in a vehicle that has blood, possible blood on the mattress. And that right there is important. This has always been one of those things that kind of sits in the back of your head and kind of bugs you a little bit." What do you make of that? Obviously, he's a very important figure in all this, and he clearly is troubled by this all these years later and is questioning what the hell happened inside of this van, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, one of the part of the Innocence Project's motion and filings, they had a declaration from a guy by the name of Mike Gutchell. He was an ABC producer. You might have remembered him, Joel. He was out and about for many, many years. He became obsessed with this case, and he was the first one to follow up. He found the van. He located the fire inspector, went to his house, and I was talking with Mike a few weeks ago, and he said, the guy opens the door and he said, "I've been waiting for somebody to come and talk to me," because he has felt as though this might have had something to do with Lacey's disappearance, and in his mind was never really investigated properly. And again, I mean, the odds of it having to do with Lacey, the odds of her DNA in that van, they're hugely astronomical at this point, because there's, all we have is that this van was found the day after she went missing. But that, to his point, is enough to investigate to the end, and that's what's happening here. It sounds like, as long as the judge allows that material to be tested by the LA Innocence Project.
By the way, tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time, Lori Vallow's cousin, Megan Connor, is going to join us. She has an amazing life story. She went to hell and back, not to mention the fact that Lori Vallow and her are cousins, and she grew up with her. So you're going to hear her story, one-on-one interview tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time. with Megan Connor. So I am looking forward to that interview. Big shout out goes to Laura Ingle. She's out in Northern California right now covering the story, and she's going to have some exclusive reporting on NewsNation. So look out for that. And then the Employee of the Day award goes to Doug Maynor. We literally called in a panic. He gets the reserved parking spot outside of STS Global headquarters. We found out Laura could only join for a few minutes, and he stepped in. He was in the prosecutor's office in Modesto when this was all playing out. Doug, where do you think this goes from here? And thank you, by the way.
You're welcome. And I think where it goes from here is more court hearings. If I could, can I comment on something that came up earlier, which is why Scott wasn't transported from Mule Creek to Modesto? If you look at it from his perspective, his world is that cell right now, and he has his freedom within the cell. He has to leave that. He's shackled with a belly band, handcuffs, leg irons on his feet. He's shoved in the van. He sits in that van for 8 hours and then goes and sits in the cell for a day or two for a 15-minute hearing. It's very difficult for him physically and probably emotionally as well to be transported back and forth for all these hearings. I have a feeling if there's a really meaningful hearing, he may show up in person, but I don't think anybody should attach any significance to the fact that he chose to remain on Zoom as opposed to coming in person.
Thank you for adding that. And so more hearings ahead, according to Doug Maynor. Ted Rowlands, Court TV, a stand-up guy. Everyone from Wisconsin's a nice person. He's originally from Wisconsin. That is the Midwest. That's the middle of the country. That's where people are nice. Stay away from New York and LA. Modesto, people are nice in Modesto. You can tell that Doug's a nice guy. 20 years as a correspondent for CNN and ABC News. Covered it all. Now he's with Court TV. Ted, same question. What are you looking for next in this, as you said, this never-ending case that is Scott Peterson?
Well, the judge set 3 hearings, one in April, one in May, and then one in early July. And after that, they'll figure out a schedule in terms of what is going to be available to test and what isn't. So, yeah, this is going to take a long time. I do believe at the end of the day here, this Innocence Project look at the case is going to be it. It's over. Either he walks or this will be it for Scott Peterson in terms of viable appeals, unless something comes out of the woodwork, obviously later. But buckle up. It's going to be a while. It's not going to be something that's decided next week.
We will stay on it. These other hearings are coming up, and we will hopefully get Ted, Doug, Laura back. Heather Wren reminding me it is Wisconsin, Joel. Ted, can you do the Wisconsin accent? You obviously don't have it because you're a TV anchor, but can you go back into it?
Oh, yeah. You're darn tootin', yeah. Priest, give me a beer.
It's a whole other language.
Go Badgers.
Go Badgers. Love you, America. Love you, Modesto. Love you, Atlanta, Georgia, the home of Court TV. And we're thinking about Lacey and Connor Peterson. We'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time with Megan Connor, the cousin of Lori Vallow, who has an amazing life story. See you then. Thanks for sticking around for this doubleheader. Talk to you tomorrow.